In this episode of the podcast, Mike and I talk about Eno Sarris' article about how fast a human can really throw a baseball and how AI could change player development forever.
All right, we're live on the podcast. We're talking about a very important topic, which is how hard do we think that a pitcher could throw a baseball philosophically?
I get this question like every month or 2 months.
Yeah?
Someone asks, yeah.
From me?
No,
From me specifically?
No.
I
You're
just
one of them.
send you a little
You're
note?
one of them, yeah.
I'd slide a note into your mailbox?
It's a rotating cast of you and Eno Sarris and Jeff Passan and everybody else.
Well, I mean, that's because it's a fascinating question.
It is, I
I
suppose.
think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's fascinating for a certain type of person who spends a lot of their time thinking about baseball. But it's interesting to see how much the floor has risen over, but like the ceiling has not really moved.
Yeah.
And you know, not to, credit to Eno who did a lot of the,
Very
who
good
obviously
article.
wrote the article. Yeah, it was a great article. He teases out a lot of these things. One of which is, he's got a friend of the program, Jimmy Buffy, talking about the biomechanical maximizing model.
Yes.
Has it like 125.
Yep.
Hard to know if that's, but then everybody thinks that's insane. Not spoiler alert, but like,
Jimmy's not. He's not stupid.
he's
You know,
not.
so
No,
you
of course
gotta
not.
treat
Of course not.
him-
It's
Not-
not.
not-
I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm
It's an
saying
interesting.
I'm saying that number is in the article, then floated to a bunch of other players who are like, my God.
Yeah, it's
no.
not like Jimmy was like, I wonder what number. He didn't just.
Of course, no. He very clearly
Yeah.
he very clearly did it from like a ground up
Yeah.
analysis. So, but you've got a number. You don't really have a number. I
don't have a number.
You've got a framework.
Yeah, I think it's I always want to look at other sports and to see. We see the same phenomenon in all the other sports, right? Like there's Usain Bolt, that's our oldest Chapman.
Yeah.
Maybe Noah Lyles now, America running, but the same thing, of all the people that have not tested positive to run a very fast, the 100-meter dash, kind of the canonical thing.
Yep.
First of all, 70% of people who have contended for the title have tested positive in the 100-meter dash.
There we go.
So,
You got to get the enhanced games going.
yeah, but even still, right? And so, but this actually comes up in a thread on Twitter about like performance enhancing drugs and like if they had like the lax policies of the 80s and the 90s in MLB, and then they cracked down. And I argued and said like I think MLB's drug testing policy is one of the best effective at what it does because not only does it seem to work, but possibly more importantly, the players are terrified of it. And like so deterrence.
Sure.
So like that might be more important, but like like they think it works, so that's all that matters, really.
Yeah.
Now I would argue it also does work, right? But
Anecdotally, there are a decent. It seems to me an increasing number of players who, when they get popped, are also like, this came from like my cornflakes, or this came from something that I was taking that I didn't know had a thing in it, and very much fewer incidences of just like, all right.
yeah, that's true. I mean, like you have to be careful of all of those supplements.
Yeah.
You have to stick with NSF products. If you play professional baseball or any sport, you have to stick with NSF and the few. And it's not like MLB and the union aren't very clear on what supplements you should take. And what vendors you should get them from.
Right.
And just looking for the NSF. Those people pay a lot of money. They're randomly audited all the time. Yeah, so Thorne is a good one, of course, and there's a ton of others, Clean and many others. But anyway, so yeah, but I argue, like, even if we never had reasonable testing, I don't think we would see anything nuts. That's my opinion. It's not like we had people throwing 104 in the 90s, and then they don't do that anymore,
Because you're saying like
I don't
it was
think the
very
drug
clear
leader-
that they were just hitting the shit out of the ball.
Yeah, and
during
you didn't
that
see
period of
people
time.
throwing a bazillion miles an
And
hour.
then they didn't after.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like anabolic steroids and like the concept of like increased muscle mass and bone density and all the other positive physical effects it has on the body. Like that accelerated it for a short period of time. But it's not like we don't see those effects naturally just through people growing and better nutrition and better understanding of training and whatever, like that hasn't yielded people throwing like 130 miles an hour. So it's hard for me to believe that like even if we had these lax policies that we would see crazy high numbers. You think it'd probably be higher for sure. I would have to admit that, but I just don't think that it would be like this huge step function change, which leads me to believe that it isn't an incremental gain that's going to fix the ceiling. It has to be a stepwise. We have to think differently on how to solve the problem, so to speak, if it is a problem. If you want to throw 120, I don't think that just like incremental gains are going to get us there. Just like if you want to run an 8-second 100, like that's just not, like it's probably not going to happen.
That's right. You need like blades for legs.
Is that right? Exactly.
Well, but like that, I think part of, or at least like if you read the tea leaves of the article, it was like, some of the proposed solutions are, or at least what Glenn was saying, like Glenn Fleissig, who was, had very early on theorized that there was going to be this like local maxima of velocity. A lot of what he was, positing was the way that he sort of backwardsly analyzed that was that the UCL has to carry a lot of load and that there's a lot of very specific musculature that supports that when trying to produce these peak velocities or not, just throwing in general. And seemingly, if you read between the lines, then you're starting to talk about like very specifically training that. You think that the type of modeling that you're talking about?
Didn't he get it right? Didn't like many decades ago? Didn't he guess a certain number, like around 105? Around
that seems to be what
I seem to remember. That like he like nailed it. So I want to give him credit if it's true.
That's what the article says.
Yeah. That seems to be right. And he said it in like the 80s, in the early 90s. Like he called the shot a while ago. So
in the article, he's like, I didn't just pull that number out of my butt.
Yeah, no, I seem to remember that that he said it a long time ago. So I want to make sure I was giving him credit for that because it's not easy to guess that number. What was the question again?
But is what you're talking about like a paradigm shift that is like, okay, there's like more seemingly if you zoom out and think about what you just said about the anabolic steroids impacting the hitting side more specifically, it's like there's all these prime movers of like big muscles, the superstructures that support gross athletic movement. And then seemingly we're talking about like there's like a couple of structures that are inside the elbow or around the forearm or somewhere in the arm that are undertrained, underutilized, underrecovered, that are leading to, not being able to throw 150 or whatever.
Yeah, I think if there is some sort of answer, it's got to be there. I don't think it's a forced production issue. Is probably what I think Glenn is saying too.
Seems to be what everybody seems to be saying because Jimmy's model when he built it from the ground up for like the theoretical person that could throw 125, the ground reaction forces that he was using in that model, like we have higher ones in our lab.
To say we have 3 to 4 people
so it's
higher
just
than
like,
the maximums.
So it's
and
like,
those guys all threw in the upper 90s though. So that's
they do, but apparently, if they were moving even more efficiently, they could throw 125.
Yeah. Actually, both the two of the top people that have the highest ground reaction force, neither have had arm issues. Neither have had arm surgery. That's interesting. But it just can't. Not can't. It probably just isn't a forced production thing. It's got to be some sort of neurological thing / forearm musculature. I think there's probably a huge neurological component to it as well, like the brain.
In what way? Like the brain just not
nerves firing fast
releasing
enough.
you to do
impulse
it?
or something like that in there. There's some sources I can't quote on the record talking about like neural doping is a big thing in the Olympics and stuff like that, like taking specific drugs for neural stuff rather than muscular change, like anabolic steroids. And obviously it's completely ridiculous in the Olympics. You're going to easily test positive for any of that. But there's like a whole class of unregulated like neural dope drugs that theoretically are, athletes are taking and doing well in untested meets. It's hard to know, but like I've heard from some Olympic coaches that that's like a big thing. So that's possible that it's really, it could help in baseball, I guess. I don't know. I don't know much about the subject. I've just heard about it from some Olympic coaches.
Interesting. So you think there's some level of enhancement or training or something that's required in some way that nobody's really thinking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's not any different than, we already see it in like college and stuff like that. People, using Ritalin and methylphenidate and Adderall and stuff like that for,
for academics?
Yeah, and so it's not so hard to believe that something related to that could help like neural output for force production in your body generally, whether it allows you to produce more force. Your muscles are being limited by it's not just purely a muscular contraction, right? Like the brain and the nervous system have to activate the muscles and turn them on in a certain way, and in a certain threshold, and there's limiters built into all of that. So being able to override them or train them differently. That's all common knowledge that that's true, but how you do it is like not really well understood, I think.
And there seems to be a bit of a violation of the Hippocratic Oath if you're truly going to start doing that level of leave aside the neural doping stuff. If you were just like, okay, we've found a way to release the brain's inhibitions on your athletic performance via whatever means, it's like, I don't know.
It's probably not great.
Probably not great. And the people who would be like, yeah, I'll do it. It's like, probably not likely to be the candidates for the near 125.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing. Is anyone listening to and getting inspired to look into neural doping, it's like none of this stuff is going to matter unless you already throw 100.
Right.
So if you don't throw 100, none of this stuff is really going to matter that much because it's probably not. That's not the stuff that's holding you back. So it's this weird intersection of you have to have someone like Aroldis Chapman, you have to have someone that's gifted enough to do that, and then they have to do something different. Right?
That's right.
So like it just seems so.
Because if you just sit 87 and your breaking ball's kind of slop, then it's just like, well,
that stuff's not.
Let's just fix the breaking ball, get some sleep.
Yeah, that stuff doesn't.
Eat a steak, do some
any
squats.
of these advanced things aren't gonna matter.
Yeah.
But the force limiting stuff on the arm is probably a big thing. It probably goes all the way back to childhood, in throwing, and your body develops like protective mechanisms. It's hard to know exactly what's going on. There's just so little research done on EMGs and the muscle, like in the arm. Like that's the biggest thing is like we know a lot about how the body moves from inverse kinematics and kinetics and like inferring forces, but we have so little information on how the muscles fire and patterns and stuff like that, which is a big area of research for Driveline, as you know.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the childhood thing because, in the article does mention Ben and what's his brother's name? Ben Joyce has a brother.
Yeah, Zach.
Zach.
Yep.
That's right. And
the volunteer fireman.
That's right. Ben throws 103 and Zach throws 98. And they were like asking about the differences, and Ben was quoted as just being like, I think I just always tried to throw a little harder. Which is interesting if it's part of it is just like, hey, here's these two people who have very similar and albeit like pretty elite genetic makeup, and then one of them just tries harder over a pretty substantial period of time. That's a very interesting little anecdote.
Yeah. I mean, trying it goes all the way back for decades. Have you ever like tried to throw harder? I mean, I feel like it's not that simple. It's like, well, it is for a lot of these guys actually. Like if they would just try for a longer period of time, it probably would help.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's not a thing that a lot of people do. Plus, you got to worry about like what you're being told as a kid and told like what is important. And unfortunately, a lot of coaches just want to win. So as a result, like true athletic development or like to maximize your genetic potential is not something any T-ball coach or like coach thinks about. So
yeah.
That's
I mean,
a pretty big problem.
mostly they think about their actual job.
And just like not
working at the post office or whatever.
It's true in the minor leagues too. I mean, there's just so many organizations are run, including ones I've been a part of, where they just talk like, they want the pitchers to throw strikes and get in the zone, and so they can like leave the park at a decent time and get to beat us before they close. It's like just like stuff they think about.
Sure.
it's very disheartening, and just at the end of the day, like really countermands, what's actually good for the athlete and what's good for the organization. Some of the best organizations we saw, when I was a pitching coordinator of the Reds and just followed the minor leagues closely, they just have a very strong belief on what they do, and then if they walk like 14 batters or whatever, you can just see the coaches have the exact same behavior the entire time. Like they don't ask them to change or whatever, and that's hard because unless you've ever coached like high school or you've ever coached baseball, then you don't know how hard that is.
Yeah.
If you're a fan, you're just like, oh, it's easy, just don't bunt, do this or whatever. It's like, but until you've sat there and seen your players grounded to a lot of double plays and just strike out with men on third with no outs, it's like I don't think you understand how there's something inside you that makes you, want to bunt and things like that. Until you experience it, you don't know. So it's a kudos to a lot of those organizations that do a good job. Staying focused, and it's obvious who they are. You can they win. They develop pitchers.
Do you think the rise of AI and supercomputing like helps with getting us closer to a lot of this stuff? Like it's very obvious to me that like if you want to, whether you're thinking about the like performance maximizing viewpoint or the risk reduction viewpoint, we think about both like all the time with our players, but it seems like there's just new tools to be put to use there. I'm curious. I mean, have you ever tweeted about AI before?
No.
Oh yeah.
No, you're really blowing my cover here.
I know it might be a hobby of yours.
It is. Yeah. Adoption is low. Obviously, it has been for a while. It continues to be, which is crazy.
Adoption is low.
Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah,
baseball, corporate America, whatever.
Sure.
So it's an interesting. I just doesn't feel like this incremental game. Like the idea of AI being able to simulate like lots of. I think simulation is where we need to go. Is like simulating all the types of movement that's possible, rather than a heuristic viewpoint, which is kind of how a lot of the people in the article approach it and scientists approach it. It's hard to admit that you need a new paradigm, but that's basically what happened with, if anyone's listening to this and hasn't seen AlphaGo, which I'm sure is all of you, you should watch AlphaGo on Netflix. It's also on YouTube for free. It's about a different approach to a Go engine, the board game Go, on how to build an engine, because forever people were like, computers not believed that it was true that computers couldn't beat the best Go players, and not just the best, but like very good Go players could not be beaten by computers. And it was theorized sometime in like 2015. I can't remember exactly when it was. That was like they did like a poll. It would be like 50 to 70 years before like a computer could reasonably beat Go players, and then within a year, Google had trained an AI to crush Lee Sedol and other of the best players, and played moves that like were not. They don't play like the bot doesn't play like a human. It plays like something that's unrecognizable. Whereas the best bots play like a human but worse, right?
Sure.
And then that kicked off something I know a lot more about, which is chess. And then forever they had a engine that was heuristic, just like we talk about in anything. It's like the best humans say like, oh, if the best hip extension and angular velocity in the arm moves this fast, and the ground reaction forces, and then this produces this type of pitcher. And that was the top engine called Stockfish. I think it was 14.
So you're saying like a heuristic model is like
you get all the
way
expert coaches, yeah.
You get everybody in a room and you're like, what are the best chess moves? And
Yep.
then this thing learns everything that you're saying.
Yep.
But you're saying they did the opposite, which is they didn't put anybody in, and they were just like, here's the rules of chess and how to win. Go.
Yep. Yeah, here's all the legal moves.
And then it played like, whatever.
Millions of games.
Millions of games where it just lost.
Yep. Yeah, and so then in chess it created a very similar to Go, where the best heuristic engines in chess were already the best. They beat the players all the time. So this
Sure.
was like not a thing. In Go, it caused a huge stir. In chess, it was like, of course, the engines are the best. So even the heuristic engine was better than all the best players. And so the difference with that was when they introduced like artificial intelligence and self-learning, what it caused was a very different way to play chess. So then that engine started beating the heuristic engine, which was news to everybody. And then that heuristic engine adopted those strategies, and now all the engines use some form of AI. and it plays very differently, and it's very interesting. And so I think that's probably where we need to go in baseball. Is like it's why people like Dr. Mike Marshall, rest in peace, are important, because it's such a different way of thinking about how to throw a baseball and how to model the throw and just how to think in general. And you need people like that. Like you need people like him and Paul Nyman and Dick Mills, also rest in peace, and many others, Fritz Outman. And you need very different testable theories to do that. And you used to need humans, but now maybe you could just have a computer hypothesize many different ways to do things. And we have the compute power for that now. But that's only very recent that we've had that kind of compute power.
Yeah. We meaning Driveline, or we meaning
it's society
Earth?
in general. Yeah, Earth in general.
Got it.
And that's cheap and available, and anyone can do it. Like,
Sure.
For less than $10,000, you have all the compute you need to do it, which has not historically been true.
What do you mean when you're saying like you would simulate it? Like you're saying that if you use what you just talked about as an analogy, where it's like, okay, for AI, it just learns the rules of chess, and then goes and plays. It would just learn the rules of pitching, and then it would try to simulate a skeletal throw.
Yeah. How
And
the
the
muscles
first one
pull
would
on
be like
tendons
your head hits your knee or whatever.
Yeah. There's tons of video tutorials on people doing this. Not pitching, but just like how to teach a man to walk using AI, and it's like just hilarious. Like it's very hard to do. Of course, it's complicated. But it's definitely doable, and it's almost all self-learning, and they use like genetic algorithms where it's like you have like, a fitness function. Like for pitching, it would be like, do they throw the ball towards the plate and how fast? You would, it's the high score, and then you would take the best of that division, and that generation, they call it, would be like 100 people throwing the ball, or maybe even throwing the ball, maybe not, right? Moving. And then you select the best of that group, then you have 100 random mutations in the next group, and then over and over and over, and then it's called like a genetic algorithm to figure out.
Oh, because you're almost like breeding them.
Yeah, exactly.
You're just like, interesting.
Yeah. For a more approachable version of this, if people haven't already.
Oh, you don't think people are excited about the Galapagos Island of pitching mechanics?
Yeah. You can look up Seth Bling's Mario video. Mario.
The what now?
Seth Bling is his name on YouTube.
All right.
And he has a video called Mario. It's like Mario, but IO is like slash.
Yeah.
And he writes a neural net, like a AI, to teach a computer how to play Super Mario World from scratch, like on its own. And it learns on its own how to beat World 1-1. And it's very good because it's like it's 5 minutes. It's entertaining. It's a video game.
Yep.
But you can understand, and it shows every genetic algorithm. It shows every generation of the genetic algorithm and like how it learns and how it does things. And it ends up beating the level very convincingly, but it plays very differently than a human, which is pretty neat. It doesn't mean that's the optimal way. It just like figures out how to do it. So it's pretty cool. That's a much more approachable, entertaining thing than what I was talking about.
Because you could envision a world where there's that. Where it figures out how to beat it once, and it doesn't do it like a human. But then the more constraints and the more, breeds of this AI you would get, it could potentially like overclock the human fastest World 1-1 beating time or whatever.
Yeah, and that's already happened. Yeah, in speedrunning, something I know a lot about, video game speedrunning. They do like what's called like tool assisted speed runs. So they like you have a computer and you go frame by frame to design like the greatest speed run, and then humans try to approach the limit of like what's possible. So it's like a very similar like combined approach, effectively.
Interesting.
Yeah, and generally humans can't do what the tool assisted runs can do, but they get close.
Why?
Sometimes they're just like the timing is just ridiculous. Like it's you have to hit like a certain button press combination that's like 10 inputs at 1/60th of a second per time. It's just like humans just can't do that. But like you can still learn from it, and that's the point. It's like they build these AI tool assisted runs or whatever, and then it's not that you're supposed to do everything in it. You're like, okay, what of that subset can a human do? And then you pull up, you extract that, which I think is pretty interesting. And it's not like we're going to be facing robots or whatever anytime soon in baseball, but. Being able to simulate it to bring it to something that's actually actionable. Imagine that, like, you swing right now in Driveline and most other advanced places. You have this huge data set of a player's swing or of your swing or how you pitch, and then we compare it to the best and then that are close to you. and then we make recommendations for drills that we know that have this type of impact on your mechanics, and then we do that, then we test them, and verifiably they work, and you get better. So that's great. Like that's by far the state of the art. I'm very proud of what we've built. We've done a hell of a job, and it works, by evidence, by all the success we've had. But there's probably a better way to do it, to be more personal. One of the things that we're doing now, as you've talked about and we've hammered, is that used to require putting 43 markers on the body, wearing sliders, shoes, and a hat, and that's it. And that's inherently limiting, right? Because not only do you have to strip down and do this, you have to come to Seattle, or you have to go to Phoenix or whatever. Yes, okay, all those things are real. But more importantly, like that takes a lot of labor from our perspective, which means the price has to go up. We have to have we have to have specialists that can put all these markers on in the right spot and do all this, and that's just a lot of work. That really isn't related to baseball. It makes you better in the assessment, there's no doubt, but that's just a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
So now we've converted almost entirely to markerless, which is great because this doesn't require any specialists. Like the specialists have moved to the back office. That's like me and Clayton and Adam and Joe Marsh and engineers in the back end that make sure the system runs. But that's better because we can do that asynchronously. We don't have to do it when the kid's in there. And then more importantly, that you've always talked about, is that the assessment is going to be dead someday, which there isn't going to be an assessment.
That's right.
It's just that it's always long live the assessment, right? Like you just throw and then we always get that information.
Yeah, everything is.
Right, so instead of 6 weeks, it's 1 week, or it's whatever you want.
Everything is the assessment. Everything is the retest.
Exactly.
Everything is the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's live-ish, we get all that. And that's huge. So that's there. So that's already going to be a huge step function change for us, which is going to be great. But then imagine if we have all of that data and we train a model, and instead of saying the best throwers do this or whatever, it's we have these simulated human movement patterns that we're quite sure that produce better results, and then here's the 5 most likely for you. Because instead of saying you move like this and you should make these changes, we don't necessarily really know that you can make these changes. Almost all the time we're accurate. It does work. But instead it's instead of you swing like this, if Travis Bazana, when he was here last year, the biggest concern he had was his bat path. He was weak to fastballs up in the zone. And by weak, I mean he was merely the 3rd best player in college. But it was still a weakness of his. Sure. So he fixed that. He flattened his attack angle. He did do that. And his launch angle went down, and he became a much better hitter, right, as a result. Okay, great. And that works, and that model is very good. It works for players as good as Travis Bazana, and it works for junior college players that aren't as good as him, right? But it would have been faster for someone like Bazana, who's very high work ethic, high motor, loves data, if we just showed him a version of him with the flatter attack angle. We just showed him a video of a simulated skeleton of him doing it, which we can't do yet. And then he could see it and be like, oh, okay, that's what my swing should look like against a 94-mile-an-hour fastball in the top upper third. Okay, right? Right now we can't do that. And here's the drills and here's the things that you need to do it, and here's the muscular outputs that change as a result of that. So as a result, you should deadlift more, squat less, et cetera, et cetera. So, so we're going to get there for sure, and it's pretty cool. We can talk openly about it because there's no moat. What you need for that is a huge training data set. And it's funny, I was listening to the Risk of Ruin podcast with myself on it today to prepare for this. Actually, I'm giving a talk. I'm giving a good to learn talk.
You don't prepare for this.
No, I don't. I was giving a good to learn talk. I'm preparing for a good to learn talk on pitch drill scores, actually. But we're lucky that we've been writing this stuff down and collecting data forever.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
That's our moat, So there's no way to get that moat. You can't buy it. You can't, you record. You just got to start at day zero.
That's right. Steve Cohen, if you're listening.
Yeah, he could buy it.
You can't buy it.
Yeah, well, I don't know what good it would do him, but yeah,
he wouldn't want it.
So anyway, those are my thoughts on AI and where it's going to go and where we're going to go, where we're going.